Welcome back everybody, I am Follygon and this is day 6 of Sculptober. If you haven't been following along, I have 5 other sculpting videos detailing my process on each day for each new prompt as we go through October. Today the prompt is bulk and I decided to sculpt Maui because he's a pretty bulky guy, right? If you're new around here, click that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. There you can find all my courses, brushes, materials, as well as the Appeal Academy, my course and mentorship program. I'm really excited to show you guys this process for this sculpt because it's a little bit different than what I normally do. I don't typically break things down as much as I do for this character. So this is a bit of an older process that I learned at my first studio job working as a digital sculptor. I had a coworker that really broke things up to the extreme when they were sculpting. And I thought it was a really interesting process that I tried to apply to some of my work. It was something that I really enjoyed doing, and for a while it really helped me to kind of think about my different shapes for my sculpts differently. It's a really nice process if you've never tried it before, but you'll see more of it coming up here very soon to kind of better understand what I'm talking about. So as you can see, for the Maui character that I'm building out, I have everything split into not just a separate subtool, which is what that list is over on the far right side of the screen, but I also have them split into separate polygon islands. Those are the individual floating parts that you see all around on screen right now. So normally when I start a sculpt, I'll often just start with a sphere and I'll keep everything together and continue to kind of block out my shapes just from one single object. With this process though, it involves using lots of different objects to better represent the primary forms, or better yet, the primitive shapes that make up a more complex form, like a character for Maui here. I will of course combine all of this later, but it's just a really fun and cool process to really get yourself thinking about those, very, very simple shapes. So even taking a look at the nose, which I combine very soon, you can see that it's 3 spheres that I very quickly duplicated, squashed, and then got a 4th one for the bridge of the nose that I just stretched up really quick. Very, very simple stuff, not complicated at all, and I really think it helps you to kind of get in that mental state where you're starting to recognize some of these shapes. Once you get used to this though, I do think that it's a little bit of a slower process. You can get very controlled shapes from this, but if you are a skilled sculptor and you're confident in your abilities, I think it's a lot faster to work with just one single object, at least in the earlier stages. Sometimes afterwards I'll split things up more and more as I go. It really just kind of depends on the character and what you need for the job. On the last sculpt for Sculptober, I bit off, I don't want to say a little bit more than I could chew, but it was definitely a big time chunk out of my day. I ended up working on Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard as grass-type Pokemon. It was pretty cool. I had a lot of fun working on that, but like I said, it was a big time investment. So I wanted this one to be a little bit more simple. The problem was that once I got pretty close to being done with his face, I realized that his hair was going to be an absolute mess to deal with. So I'll talk more about the curly hair when we get there, but God, I can't help it. I can't help but choose things that just end up taking a lot of time to complete. Things are moving by pretty quick on screen, so I'll try to talk about the process a little bit more here, but if you guys do have specific questions about what I'm doing, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll address them in a future video if I can. The character's eyes on this one were actually quite a bit more simple than what I normally do. Actually, I should say that a lot of the shapes here were a lot more simple than what I normally do, which was really fun. I really like working with these hyper simplistic shapes. It doesn't necessarily mean just because it's a simple shape that it's easy to, replicate in 3D or sculpt. It just means that it's pretty close to a primary form, or it doesn't have a lot of secondary form like wrinkles or anything like that, or textures, high resolution skin pores, etc. But if you've ever tried to sculpt a character like Maui here, you probably already know that it's not super easy to do. He's got a lot of cool stuff going on with his face, but lucky for me, a lot of it kind of just came together here. There are definitely some things that, looking back, I would like to change. The front portion of his face, mainly the plane where his eyes are, is just way too flat. I was not a huge fan of how that turned out, but really I didn't have enough time to kind of go back and make the corrections for that. These are supposed to be quick things with just daily sculpts, so it's really fun to go back through and look at the process directly after I get done sculpting, to kind of go back through and post-mortem it so quickly. That's not normally something that I get to do on my characters. For my normal videos, I spend, multiple weeks working on a character, so it's a long process, and then when I get to the end of that, taking a step back to look through all the footage is a lot longer process than this, and it's really cool to just go from one day sculpting to editing and reviewing that all at the same time. But also in another way, it's kind of annoying because it points out all these mistakes and things that I want to fix, but I don't necessarily have time to do that all in one day. Once you get all those primary shapes in there for your character, you need to eventually start combining things together, which is kind of what I've been doing here, and mainly using my clay brush, begin to blend, add slight secondary forms, volumes, and kind of figure out the edge quality for these different areas, focusing on essentially what you might think of as line weight in 2D, thinking about these sharp edges, these soft edges as well, and how you're going to transition between the two. One really good example of that, if you're not familiar with this concept, is to look at the area at the brows. So the way that the lines transition on the bridge of the nose around there, as they flow up, stay really tight, and then as they get up towards the brow, they gently start to fade out and blend into the flat. This is a concept called edge quality. Like I said, it's very similar to line weight. It's just focusing on getting some sharp edges, some soft edges, and making sure that neither one is the exact same for the entire length of that shape or the entire length of that stroke. That makes for a very boring form, and we don't want boring forms when we're trying to create appealing characters like what we have here with Maui. He's definitely a very appealing character, although the way he turned out here looks a little bit awkward on occasion. I found this really funny image online on Google Images when I was looking for some references, and I have to show you it because it's the stuff of nightmares. I feel like I recognize the face. It's like a Muppet or something. I really can't remember. I've seen it in a meme or somewhere. If anybody watching knows, let me know down in the comments because I can't remember where I saw this creepy little face. Now it's on to adding some quick eyebrows to our character. Very simple. I really enjoy using my cube tube brush for eyebrows and eyelashes. It's a really simple brush. You can get it over on my Gumroad if you're interested in it. It's a tri-parts welded brush for those that are familiar. Just a simple tube in the shape of a cube, hence the name cube tube, right? Makes sense. So now I've also started merging pretty much all the shapes together in the face. I am going to do some proportional tweaks and edits now that I have everything together, as well as beginning to blend between these shapes is incredibly important. There's a lot of shapes that are way too sharp around that. It's the corner of the cheeks there where we have that inflated area around the mouth. So some softening happening around there, as well as, sharpening up very specific areas, but for the most part, I want to keep him as a pretty, soft character for most of his shapes. So anytime I'm adding any sharp shapes, I'm being very particular with them, and I wanted more of the visual attention on his kind of scrunched up face there. Really tiny eyes, kind of make that character feel even bigger and bulkier. It's a nice little technique for you guys. Give your character small eyes and make them feel strong. Then it's on to adding some color, some poly paint here to the face, starting off with, as always, a simple base coat. You can just click on that fill object button on the far left side of your screen underneath your color selection to just fill in a simple color. And then what I like to do is I will set my RGB intensity for my paintbrush to around anywhere between 5 to 15 and very gently start adding in some different values. So some warmer areas around the cheeks, the nose, also the lips here to get a little bit darker for that, difference in skin tone that you would find there. There was a little bit of a darker area around the eyes. Some of that could be attributed to the shadow cast behind the character because he kind of has this large brow, large shelf shape. So I didn't want to exaggerate that too much, so I ended up fading that back a little bit. And then it's off to creating some nice curly hair, which was kind of a pain. And I tried to make it fairly simple here, duplicating a lot of pieces as you can see. The brush that I used to create the initial curl, the initial strand, was a brush that I got from Steven Anderson, Smartest. You guys can find it online on Steven's ArtStation and download it. I think it was only a couple bucks. It comes with 4 different presets. I was very lazy here though, and only really created a couple different strands, and then as you can see, duplicated, reused a lot of them, and continued to add volume to the hair. So a lot of this is going to look very similar, but I was very limited on time, of course, only a day here. I would have loved to go through and added a lot more variety to this hair, but sometimes you can get away with some little tricks here like what I'm doing. And honestly, because I'm only rendering the character from the front, I could have gotten away with even less. You gotta think about what your purpose is for your sculpt. If you're just going to render something and do a simple image, which is often the case for these daily sculpts for Sculptober, well then you might be able to get away with not including certain aspects of the backside of the character, like maybe leaving a bald patch for hair that you don't want to include. I end up filling it in though because I felt like it was way too awkward to leave this big open space on the back of his head. So I include some form back there, and I apply that directly onto this original base mesh that I created that was just a sphere that I stretched out to kind of represent the larger form of the hair. I like to do that first just so I can get an idea of the volume and better understand what that looks like in the silhouette. If you start from the very beginning using some complex curve brush, it's really easy to get caught up in the smaller, fine details and kind of lose sight of the larger shape. So that's why I start by just doing a simple block out first, and then once I'm happy with that general idea, then I start adding details on top of that. And that's really pretty much how I sculpt everything, so I'm sure that's not very surprising for you guys. So the hair was pretty complicated on this guy. The other thing that I realized maybe a little bit too late as I was working on this guy is that he has a lot of tattoos. So I ended up simplifying a lot of the shapes that were found in these tattoos to, well, give myself a little bit of a break, because if I was gonna sculpt or paint all these tattoos, I should say, on top of the character, it would have taken me a long time. I maybe could have found some like really high resolution images of Maui from the film and possibly projected some of the paint. I probably would have needed something higher res than what I could just find online with Google Images. And as you know, limited on time, so I'm fine with simplifying what I can here. So I start off with the larger shape of the ring around the neck, because that is what is most likely going to be seen no matter what, just because I'm going to be focusing the render on the character's face. So it's very likely that the neck will be showing up as well. And then for the chest, I simply include very kind of pared down, simplified versions of the tattoos that are found on his torso. Just in case some of that ends up cropped in the image that I render with, I want at least some of the, idea of these tattoos to be there. So as you can see, very simple shapes, just throwing in some lines, some spheres, some very simple things that kind of represent the basic idea of his tattoos. And then of course, some more adjustments to the hair up top, giving that a little bit more asymmetry, as well as just making that feel a little bit more unique. Some of the strands definitely feel very similar, and that is because it was done quickly by duplicating things. I always say that if you are going to use or reuse stuff like this for duplicating hair, or for example, using a texture map for something like skin pores, you should go back through at the end and add a little bit of that, by hand touch. That way it doesn't feel quite so repetitive and like it was obviously digitally copied. For this hair, it still feels kind of digitally made and copied and duplicated, but hey, what are you gonna do? I add in a very simple stray strand up on the top corner of his head, kind of coming forward. The hair is also very far back on his head. I needed to scoot that forward. I do that before the end of this video though, so no worries. I also give him a little bit of an expression here. He was originally just kind of smiling. I actually had the eyelids tilted at a downward angle going out away from the face, which kind of made him feel sad. And I didn't really know what expression I was gonna give him here, but he's a pretty, big guy. He's often very smug in the movie, so I decided to go for a more smug expression. And if you guys have watched all the other Sculptober videos, then you know my secret for expression: raise one of those eyebrows up. Luckily, that's a thing that Maui does a lot. So hey, I'm giving a little bit of pass on this one. So that is gonna be it for day 6 of Sculptober, doing Maui for the theme of bulk. I really enjoyed getting to show you guys the process of breaking these characters down into super simple shapes. I hope that getting to see that maybe sparked your imagination for something that you could try with that. If you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, as always, you guys can check out gumroad.com/Follygon for all of my courses, brushes, and materials. And that's gonna be all for this video. You guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.